All right, welcome out. Here we are to the conclusion. This will be a very short video. We've just got a couple of chapters to look at, or a couple of essays. Should go smoothly and quickly. So this is number 84, Hamilton. Says 2 chapters in this section pick up and in places extend the arguments made before. Nothing materially new is added to these chapters for obvious reasons. Summary and commentary have been combined here. This essay first takes up the objection that the proposed Constitution contained no Bill of Rights. We talked about that before, right? To this, Hamilton replied that the Constitution of many states, including his own New York, contained no specific Bill of Rights. Hamilton then proceeded to beg the question by citing what rights were guaranteed under the Constitution. Judgment in impeachment cases should not involve more than removal from office. All trials, except in cases, that's okay. So that's the point there. People often think that impeachment means it's a trial by jury. No, it's a trial by the Senate. Really, it's not a the judiciary. Okay, so if impeachment goes so far as to remove the president from office, and if there are criminal charges, then that'll be up to the Supreme Court. All trials, except in cases of impeachment, will be held by jury. The writ of habeas corpus was not to be suspended except in cases of invasion or an insurrection where public safety required it. No titles of nobility were to be granted. Nothing need to be said to illustrate the importance of the prohibition of titles of nobility. This may truly be denominated the cornerstone of Republican government, said Hamilton. As an argument, this was ridiculous and divertive. What average Americans wanted to know was what constitutional guarantees they would have to enjoy freedom of religion. Here it is. Liberty of the press, freedom of speech, the right of people to assemble peaceably, because they didn't under King George III. They were often dispersed to far and uncomfortable places. And to petition the government for redress of grievance, the right of individuals to keep and bear arms, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. And we'll look at the details of those requirements or requests by the people in the Bill of Rights when we get to the Bill of Rights. These rights were soon stated concretely and adopted as the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, which we will get to next. To his credit, let it be said, Madison promised that if elected to the new Congress, he would use his every effort to see that, as a first order of business, a Bill of Rights was appended to the Constitution, and he carried out his pledge. As noted earlier, it was Madison who largely drafted the amendments and did the political engineering that brought about their adoption. As for Hamilton, he stated explicitly in this essay that a Bill of Rights was not only unnecessary in the proposed Constitution, but would even be dangerous, another reflection of his deep-grained anti-democratic attitudes. All right. The essay next replied, so there's even though the Constitution provided a lot for the people, a lot of safeties, a lot of rights to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and all that good stuff, there were still debates and questions and doubts and fears on both sides. Those who were more pro-government and those who were more pro the people. Right? Anti-Federalists didn't really trust the government. And even in some of the statements that I've read here in the Federalist Papers, there's a good amount of assumptions made by those who are pro-government, right? Good amount of assumptions made by people who are pro-government. And as has been stated many times, are those in government angels? Are there angels in government or outside of government? No. So you always have to provide contingencies or put contingencies in place so that one's rights to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness cannot be usurped or taken unjustly, right? And that's one of the main reasons for the Bill of Rights, right? That provision. The essay next replied to the objection, a minor one, that the seat of the national government, wherever placed, would be far from many parts of the country, and the people there would have difficulty in keeping track of what was going on. Well, said Hamilton, if there was to be a national capital, it had to be located somewhere, and the people in more distant parts had ample means of communication and sources of information to enable them to check up on what their representatives were doing in the capital. Okay, so nowadays that doesn't, with the internet and immediate communication, social media, and so forth, in the mainstream media, location of the central government has no bearing upon people knowing what's going on, right? What happens in Washington is known in Washington and California, at the opposite end of the country just as quickly. On another point, it was being argued that the establishment of a national government would entail additional expense and higher taxes. This would not be so, at least not in the beginning. The national government would take over the expense of performing functions and maintaining offices that the states were already supporting by requisitions made upon them under the Articles of Confederation. It would be merely a change of paymasters, entailing no additional expense except in one respect. Support of the proposed new national judicial system would entail a small extra expense, but it was well worth it. And again, keep in mind that this is very complicated stuff. The government, how the government functions and operates and changes, and how things are amended through the courts and through the legislatures at the federal and state levels is an ongoing, complicated, complex process, right? So learning about how our country is governed, you don't just take one class or read one book or go to one webinar or seminar or lecture or video recording, right? It's a very long, arduous, and continuous process, right? All right, and then finally, 85, Hamilton again. There remained two more points to be discussed: the analogy of the proposed constitution to your own state constitution. Federalist papers, as noted before, were all addressed to the people of the state of New York, and the additional security which its adoption would afford to Republican government, to liberty, and to property. There it is. There's your property, right? To life. People have the rights to life, liberty, and property. Of course, that property was changed to pursuit of happiness. The New York State Constitution contained as many supposed defects, and many of the same kind as those complained about in the proposed national constitution, and yet no great clamor had been raised about these. Additional securities to Republican government, liberty, and property under the proposed constitution would come chiefly in the restraints which the preservation of the Union would impose on local factions and insurrections, in the diminution of the opportunities to foreign intrigue, and the prevention of extensive military establishments, and the absolute and universal exclusion of titles of nobility, and in the precautions against the repetition of those practices on the part of the state governments which have undermined the foundations of property and credit. Certainly, the proposed constitution was not a perfect thing, as has been stated many times, but it should be accepted as it was, without prior modifications and amendments. The plan was the best that could be expected under the circumstances. Provisions have been made for amending it later. Publius, speaking through Hamilton, declared that all sincere friends of the Union should be on guard against hazarding anarchy, civil war, or perpetual alienation of the states from each other, and perhaps the military despotism of the victorious demagogue. A nation without a national government is, in my view, an awful spectacle, right? So government certainly needed, a strong central government certainly needed. And as I said before, we'll probably be going over again at some point the strong executive essays, because there's a lot there, and that's what was really focused on. You'll notice that with the House and the Senate, most of that was just laying out the architecture, right? The ways and means, how the House and Senate were functioning, right? No attempt should be made to revise the proposed constitution. I dread the more the consequences of new attempts, because I know that powerful individuals in this and other states are enemies to a general national government in every possible shape, right? This was special pleading and not true. Many venerable patriots of greater stature and longer standing than Hamilton at the time, Patrick Henry, George Mason, there's Mason University, Richard Henry Lee, Governor George Clinton of New York, Sam Adams, Massachusetts, among others, did not object to a national government, but raised fundamental questions about whether the proposed constitution was as well designed as it might be to achieve that end. Okay. So just like nowadays, there's always those who justly or unjustly, and oftentimes, more times than not, unjustly have certain fears about our government or certain officials who are elected, presidents and so forth, going to be doing this, that, and the other thing. And inevitably, almost inevitably, none of those things happen, because keep in mind that we just had a new president elected, right? That the power of the president is limited, right? He can write executive orders, but those executive orders, all of them can be wiped out at the end of his term, right? In order for substantial changes to be made, that has to go through Congress. That has to go through 435 House members and then 100 senators, and then signed by the president, and if vetoed, back through again for a greater majority. And there's those checks and balances. And as laws are made and put on the books, then it's up to the judiciary oftentimes to interpret those laws in certain cases where there are lawsuits and whatnot. And if the president does something wrong, the judiciary can come forth and determine whether or not what the president is doing is right or wrong for the people. There's impeachment. So it's very difficult to have a lot of power as the president of the United States. Those powers are put in check oftentimes with your checks and balances in the three branches of government. So don't go getting all excited about, somebody new in office and they're going to do this, that, and the other thing. And oh my gosh, so-and-so is a dictator or a Hitler or, whatever. I've never seen anyone that's even remotely close in office be of that ilk. Okay. All right. Thank you. That's it. Thanks for coming out. Next thing we'll get into is the strong executive. There's a few essays there I want to get into in a little more detail. And then we'll get into the Bill of Rights and the other amendments, Bill of Rights 1 through 10, and then we'll follow it up with 11 through 27. Okay, so that's it for now. Have a good day and take care.